Wyoming Territory, 1889. Clara Whitfield was on the road before noon, and this was nothing new. It had been her life for 2 years, since her father died in the spring of 1887 and left her a small bakehouse, 12 acres of wheat, a mother whose health had never fully recovered, and a debt she'd been paying down month by month without asking anyone for help. She didn't know it yet, but the drought of 1887 had only been the start of the trouble. The dry season that followed, the one everyone in the territory still talked about, had scorched half the wheat fields in the valley to nothing. The neighbors who survived it knew exactly who had bought up their land for pennies on the dollar afterward. One of those buyers was Jasper Vane. Clara carried her loaves in a wicker basket she'd lined herself with waxed cloth to keep the crust from going soft in the afternoon heat. She rose before dawn to fire the oven, let the dough rise while she fed the chickens, and had the first batch out by the time the valley was fully awake. That was how it was done in Wyoming, and it worked. The route took 3 hours on a good afternoon, 9 stops, starting with the Prescotts at the north end of the valley. The list had changed the month before. The Cole property had sat empty for 3 years, since Micah Cole had been accused of stealing horses off the Prescott ranch and disappeared before the matter could be settled. 6 weeks ago, his younger brother had arrived, from where nobody quite knew, and started putting the place back together. She knocked twice. No one answered either time. On the third Wednesday of October, she knocked again, and this time the door opened. The man was 29, dark hair that hadn't seen a comb, the look of someone who'd been splitting wood for hours, flour on his shirt. Actual flour, dusted white across the front, and a rag in his hand. "Warm bread," she said, holding up the basket. 10 cents a loaf. He looked at the basket. He looked at her. "I'll buy 2, he said, "if you join me for dinner." She looked at the flour on his shirt, the rag in his hand, the low afternoon sun behind her. 3 hours of route done, and nowhere she had to be for the rest of the day. "I've got a stew on," he said, "and I only just learned how not to burn it." She went in. The Cole property wasn't what Clara expected. The kitchen was clean, the cast iron scoured and hung by size, the smell of dust and neglect replaced by wood smoke and simmering onions. A window over the wash basin faced west, letting the last of the daylight in at just the angle that made the whole room feel warmer than it was. Silas Cole moved through that kitchen like a man who'd only recently learned every inch of it and was proud of the progress. He ladled the stew without ceremony, cut her bread without fuss, poured her coffee before asking how she took it, and when she reached for the salt, he already had it on the table, which meant he'd expected her to stay. "You're Micah's brother," she said. "I am, Silas. Clara Whitfield. My family runs the bakehouse on the south end of the valley." "I know," he said. "I've smelled the wagon before I've seen it." "You've been here 6 weeks." "I've been learning how this valley works," he said. "Who talks to who? It's easier to understand a place before you try to be part of it." She ate the stew, which was good, and the bread, which was better than good, and drank the coffee, the best she'd had since her father died. She didn't say any of that. She said, "What happened to Micah?" His face went still, like a door someone holds before deciding which way to swing it. "He was accused of taking 6 horses off the Prescott ranch 3 years ago. He said he didn't do it." "How do you know?" "Because I know my brother. And because those 6 horses turned up the following spring, reshod a different way, on a property that got bought up not long after by a man who had every reason to want Micah discredited." "What man?" Clara went quiet. "I know that name," she said. She didn't tell him everything that afternoon. She told him the surface of it, that Vane ran the mercantile in Larkspur and held the milling rights on the only working grist mill for 20 miles, and that his name had a way of turning up in transactions no one could quite explain. She didn't tell him about the debt. That was her own business, and she'd been carrying it alone for 2 years. She left the Cole place 40 minutes after she arrived. "Same time Friday?" Silas asked at the door. She looked at the empty spaces in her basket. "You only bought 2. "I'll need more by Friday," he said. "I'm planning to cook again." On the drive home, she thought about Vane, about Micah, about 6 horses, and a man well connected enough that nobody asked hard questions. She thought about her own debt and who held it, a question she'd been putting off for months, because some answers, once confirmed, can't be unconfirmed. She decided she was going to find out who owned the Whitfield note. Friday, she came with 4 loaves. He'd put together a real dinner: roast rabbit, biscuits, a stew done a different way than Wednesday. "You planned this," she said. "I knew you were coming," he said. Seemed reasonable to be ready. This is not a man who needed 4 loaves of bread. "I've been cooking," he said, and left it at that. She looked at him a long moment. "Silas, why did you come back here?"
He thought about it.
Not the quick answer, the true one. "Because Micah's somewhere out there, and whatever was done to him was done here and was done here. And the only way to fix it is to be where it happened and understand it well enough to undo it." He looked at his coffee. "And because the property's ours, and I'm not going to let it be anyone else's." "That's 2 reasons," she said. "There's a third." He didn't finish it. "That's the one that got me out of bed this morning." She almost smiled. He saw it start, and she saw him see it, which was enough to make her look at her biscuit instead. They talked for an hour. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the wagon. "Sunday? Same time?" "I don't run deliveries on Sunday," she said. "I know," he said. "I wasn't asking about the bread." She got in the wagon and drove home and sat in the barn 5 minutes after unhitching the horse, thinking about a man who'd said, "I wasn't asking about the bread," like it was the plainest thing in the world. She told her mother she'd be out Sunday afternoon. Her mother, who'd watched her daughter leave before dawn for 2 years without once complaining, said only, "Wear the good shawl." Clara wore the good shawl. She confirmed it on a Monday at the county recorder's office in Larkspur. The original note had been held by the First Territorial Bank of Larkspur. It had been transferred 14 months ago to Jasper Vane. But there was something else in the file, something the clerk had no reason to point out, and she nearly missed. Buried in her father's original loan papers from 1886 was a co-signer clause. The name on it, faded almost to nothing, was the same one: Jasper Vane. That meant Vane had known about the debt, the field, and the property's value since before her father died. It meant he'd held a financial interest he'd never disclosed to the family he was quietly buying out. Under territorial law, a co-signer who purchased a note without disclosing that conflict to the original borrower wasn't operating in some gray area. It was fraud, plain and documented, right there in his own signature. She stood at the counter a long time, walked out onto the boardwalk, and did the arithmetic. The interest on a transferred note ran different from what the bank charged. The final payment she'd planned for April wouldn't be enough. 8 months if she was lucky. She thought about the millrace on the east edge of the Whitfield property, running steady for 40 years, and how under territorial water law it was worth more than the 12 acres above it, because whoever held the milling rights controlled every loaf that got baked downstream. She thought about Vane's mercantile 2 miles downstream of that mill. She understood. She didn't tell Silas. Not yet. It was her problem, and she'd been handling things alone for 2 years. Before we go on, if this story is keeping you company right now, leave a like. Tell me in the comments what you're doing while you listen. I genuinely want to know. Now, let's get back, because Silas Cole had been doing some digging of his own. He'd been working the problem for weeks, not out of vague suspicion, but the way you solve anything worth solving. Going back to the start and reading it all in order. The start was the Prescott Ranch, fall of 18. The 6 horses turned up the following spring on a small property in the North Valley, one that was absorbed into Vane's holdings not long after. Sold for well under what the land was worth. The owner left the territory fast, and no record explained why. The shoeing pattern on the recovered horses had been altered, reworked in a way that took knowledge of the original farrier's mark to disguise properly. The man who'd reported the theft to the territorial marshal wasn't Prescott. It was Vane, who had no horses on that range and no obvious reason to be counting someone else's stock. He'd simply mentioned in passing seeing the Cole brand where it had no business being. The marshal's original investigation had been thin. No warrant, no witnesses taken. The case closed the moment Micah ran. Silas spent 3 weeks writing letters to anyone who'd been in the valley in 1886. 2 people wrote back. 1. A woman in her 60s who'd lived there for decades had seen Micah the night before the horses went missing, miles from the Prescott Range, helping pull a stuck wagon off the west road with 4 other men who could vouch for him. None of that had ever made it into the marshal's file. Silas knew it wasn't enough on its own to reopen anything. He'd need the territorial marshal to agree to a formal review, with a warrant to examine the county's farrier records, which would take weeks. He wrote to the marshal's office in Cheyenne requesting exactly that, and attached the names of his witnesses. The answer came back in November. The marshal would come to Larkspur in person, with authority to examine the shoeing records and take depositions. That was the same week Silas went to the county recorder's office himself, the same Monday Clara had gone, neither of them knowing the other was there. He told her on a Sunday what he'd found about the debt and the mill, because it was her situation, and she had a right to the shape of it. She listened without interrupting. "I knew about the debt," she said when he finished. "Found out Monday. And you didn't say anything." "It's my problem. I was handling it." "You've been handling it alone for 2 years." He said it plainly. "That doesn't mean nobody else can help. I don't want charity." "It isn't charity," he said. "I've got contacts at 2 hotels in Larkspur who'd buy straight from you if you could expand your ovens. That's a market, not a favor. I've also got an empty shed with room for a second oven. In exchange, you tell me everything you know about Vane's dealings in this valley." She considered it. She was practical. She'd lined her own basket with wax cloth and reworked her route twice to save time. The offer made the kind of sense things that are worth doing tend to make. "All right," she said. Vane heard about the marshal's inquiry sooner than anyone expected. A clerk at the recorder's office owed him favors going back years. He didn't back off. Vane had come through the drought of '87 by buying land from desperate people, and he wasn't the kind to fold over one old witness and a stack of paper. He started a rumor that Silas Cole had an interest in the Whitfield place beyond what it looked like, and that the interest had a name: the mill. And he did more than talk. One night in November, 2 men working for Vane came out to the Whitfield property line. They hadn't come to burn anything or steal anything. They'd come to measure. They drove stakes into the ground along the millrace that fed Clara's bakehouse oven, close enough to the water rights that the meaning wasn't lost on anyone. One of them knocked down a section of the garden fence on his way out, letting the chickens loose on the road. Not an accident. A message. Clara found the stakes the next morning, out in the dark looking for the missing chickens. She stood over them a long time before she pulled each one out of the ground. She didn't tell her mother. She told Silas. And this time, she didn't hesitate. He looked at the stakes on the kitchen table. "That's not a rumor," he said. "That's intimidation, and intimidation leaves a trail a rumor doesn't." He brought the stakes to the marshal, still in Larkspur reviewing Micah's case. The marshal examined them, noted the maker's stamp burned into the wood, the same lumber mill that supplied Vane's mercantile, and added it to what he was already building. Even so, for 2 weeks, Clara stopped delivering to the Cole place. She left the loaves at the gate and drove on. She told herself it was caution, that she couldn't afford to be tied to a land dispute with Vane watching every move she made. It was easier to say that than to admit she was afraid. Not of Silas, but of what it would cost to keep getting closer to someone and lose him and the mill both to the same man. He left the payment in the basket every time and didn't push. On the 15th day, he came out to the road. "I know you heard the rumor," he said. "And I know the stakes scared you. I want to tell you one thing, and then I'll go back inside. And whatever you decide after that is yours to decide." He held her eyes. "I found the mill race in the county records 2 weeks before I knew about your debt. Found the debt after. Understood Vane's plan after that. I didn't help you because of the water. I helped you because the same man who ruined my brother's life is trying to ruin yours. And staying quiet about it wasn't something I was willing to do." She stood there holding the empty basket. "The mill's yours," he said. "It'll stay yours. I've got no interest in your 12 acres or your water rights, or anything on the Whitfield place. Except the woman who delivers bread before dark and lines her own basket and won't take help without making the trade fair." She was quiet a moment. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "I knew you well enough to know better. I took the easier answer." The easier answer is the one that doesn't make you look straight at something. "You look at everything straight on," he said. "It's one of the things He stopped. He hadn't meant to say that much. "Come have dinner," she said. "It's your route." "I'm done with the route today," she said. She opened the gate. He held it for her. Silas brought everything to the Larkspur community meeting in December. The witness from the West Road, the altered shoeing records, the suspicious land sale in the North Valley, the hidden co-signer clause in the debt, and the stakes bearing the mill's stamp. By then, the territorial marshal had a warrant signed in Cheyenne, not to arrest Vane on the spot, but to formally summon him to answer for fraud on the debt and to reopen the Prescott horse case for good. Vane knew the meeting was coming. He came anyway. Not coming would have meant admitting something he hadn't decided yet that he'd lost. When Silas finished, Vane stood. "Old papers, worth nothing," he said, voice dry. An old woman swearing she saw a man on a road 3 years back in the dark isn't proof of anything in a territorial court. "Maybe not alone," the marshal said from the back of the room, holding up the warrant, "but alongside an altered shoeing mark, a land sale that doesn't add up, and a co-signer clause you kept from your own borrower. It's enough to bring you to Cheyenne to answer for fraud formally on the record." Vane looked around the room. 60 people who'd known him 20 years, looking back at him now the way a community looks at someone it's realized it trusted too long. There was nowhere for him to go and no one left to stand up for him. He sat silent, knowing the summons would be carried out whether he cooperated or not. He rose again only when the marshal walked him to the door. The room stayed quiet. Then the schoolteacher, who'd been in Larkspur longer than anyone in it, said, "Well, does anyone have other business?" And the meeting went on, because a community goes on. Micah Cole came back in January. He'd been in Idaho under another name since he ran, not out of guilt but because with no proof in his favor, staying meant a noose or a cell for something he hadn't done. Silas's letter took weeks to find him. He arrived on a Wednesday, the day of the coal delivery. Clara was at the gate when the wagon came up the road, and from 50 feet off she watched two brothers see each other for the first time in 3 years. She set the basket down and drove home. She cried in the barn for 20 minutes. Hadn't done that since her father's funeral. Then she washed her face and went to check on her mother. Silas came by that afternoon. "He's home," he said. "Thinner, angrier than I expected, which is actually a good sign. I'm glad he's back." "He wants to meet you," Silas said. "He's heard plenty about the bakehouse." She looked at him. "Clara Whitfield," he said. "I've been cooking Wednesdays and Fridays since October. I've had dinner ready before you got here every time. I spent 3 months finding out exactly what trouble you were in and doing something about it. Not for the mill, not for the land, for you. I'd like to court you properly if that's something you'd consider." She thought about the stew getting better every week, about dinner always ready. "Silas," she said, "I've been considering it since the first Friday." He almost laughed. It came out as the smile she already knew, the one that changed his whole face. They were married in May, in the Larkspur church, the valley going green with the season. The whole community turned out. After watching Vane get taken down in December and spending the winter understanding just how long he'd been working them over, Larkspur had been ready to celebrate something simple since January. Micah stood at the front of the church. He and Silas had been working the property together since January. It had always gone better that way between the two of them. He'd met Clara on a Thursday afternoon in the bakehouse and told his brother, "Well, you always did have good sense about the things that matter." Clara's mother sat in the first row. Her health had picked up since December. Not dramatically, but in the way it does when a worry someone's been carrying finally lifts. After the ceremony, Micah found his brother outside. "I'll be needing more bread," he said. 10 cents a loaf," Clara answered. "I'll take whatever you've got. Within reason." "There's no within reason," Silas said. "She's got the mill." Micah looked at the mountains. "That she does," he said, and went off to talk to someone else. The bakehouse grew slow, careful, the way things that last tend to grow. By the next spring, Clara had a second oven and a proper storeroom Silas and Micah had raised over 3 weekends in March. By the second year, she had a standing contract with 2 hotels in Larkspur and a reputation that had taken 2 years to build and would take a good deal longer for anyone to unseat. The millrace on the Whitfield place, now by law the Cole place too, ran steady, same as it had for 40 years. The water rights sat properly recorded at the territorial office. No one questioned them. Jasper Vane was taken to Cheyenne to answer the charges not long after the December meeting. The case dragged through the winter. He never came back to Larkspur. No one ever heard from him again. On a Wednesday afternoon in the second spring after the wedding, Clara loaded her basket into the wagon before the sun dropped low. Silas came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Same route?" he asked. "Same route. I'll have dinner ready when you get back." She climbed up and looked out at the valley ahead, the light turning gold at the edges. The same route her father had started. The one she'd kept alone for 2 years and since kept with someone else. "Silas," she said. He was still on the porch. "Friday's stew. It was better than the week before." "I know," he said. "Change the ratio." "Don't change it again," she said. "It's right." "It is," he agreed. She drove off down the road. The Wyoming afternoon opened up around her, wide and gold, just starting to turn from bright to the first deep blue of evening. And everything, the route, the bakehouse, the mill, the man on the porch with his coffee, was exactly where it was supposed to be. Clara Whitfield knocked on a stranger's door with 2 loaves of bread and a price. She didn't plan what came after. Neither did Silas Cole. He had a kitchen turned west to catch the last light, a stew on, biscuits rising, and the readiness of a man who'd been watching the valley for weeks and noticed a wagon on the south road 3 afternoons running. He said, "I'll buy 2 if you join me for dinner." She stayed 40 minutes, not just for the stew, though it was good. Not just for the bread, though it was better than good. Because something in that kitchen felt like a place that had been waiting a long time to be used. And what came after wasn't charity, and it wasn't rescue. It was 2 people who already knew how to stand on their own, choosing to stand together instead, because together was better, and they were both honest enough to admit it. Every evening after, he had dinner ready. Every evening after, she came home to it. Some things are exactly that simple, and exactly that hard to find. May God bless each and every one of you who listen today. Until next time, keep writing.